Mission and the message. That's a tongue twister, and I don't know why. The mission and the message of Jesus. Now, I said that there's meaning behind the church's name. Many of you have been here for quite a while, and you know this, but for those that don't, the name of our church was not selected at random. It was not the subject of a focus group. Yeah, that's a good marketable name, or that name is kind of trendy, let's go with that. It wasn't how that happened. The name of our biblical church came from, you guessed it, the Bible. How novel. Maybe more churches should do that. Anyway, the name LifePoint came from a verse in John 14:6 that maybe many of you are familiar with. And this has kind of been a core verse for our church over the last couple of years. John 14:6 says this, Jesus answered, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. It was out of this verse that we declare that there's only one way to God, there's only one truth, and there's only one life that we're meant to live, and the only way that we can access that life and that truth is through Jesus. Jesus is the point at which we access our life as sons and daughters of the Most High God. Jesus is the life point. So that's how it happened. I'm sure there was a better way of explaining that, but that's the simplicity of it all. As a church, we recognize that Jesus is the only way. And our mission is to share that with anybody who will listen to us. Because you and I are both called to be everyday missionaries to the world around us in our sphere of influences. And we all share that in different ways. We're not all going out there, Bible in hand, megaphone, standing on the street corner. That's probably not the most effective way. But you and I have conversations with people every single day, and maybe not even faith-based conversations where you just hang out with people, you listen to them, you get to hear their story, and you get to be an encouragement to them. And that's what we're called to do, to be lights to the world. And as a church, we've made great strides to impact the neighborhood and the community around us, and it's been such a blessing, but we want more. I've been finding myself lately repeating that phrase, I want more. We want more as a church. As a pastor, I'm proud of this church. But if I were to take off my pastoral hat for a moment and look at the church through the lens of the overall scope of the kingdom of God as a follower of Jesus, I'm proud. I would be proud to attend this church, to serve here at this church, because great things are happening here. And not just because some funny guy with a microphone is saying that it's great and great things are happening. When Sarah and I began our wonderful journey here, we knew that it could not be business as usual. We don't simply desire to come to church on Sundays and have a good church service. I mean, that's important, but if I've said it once, I've said it like 100 times, or maybe a couple hundred times, that Sunday services are great, but that's not all there is to a church. We dig deep on Sunday mornings. We get down in the dirt. We cultivate that soil for what God's planting in us, and we make the most of that time that we have that's structured in God's presence. But our heart is to continue to seek God the other 6 days a week. That we're pursuing relationship with other people the other 6 days a week as well. And to serve the community, not just the one time during the summer that we have a community outreach, then that's the time that you serve the community, but you are actively engaged with what's going on in the world around you. How can I serve? And not just a couple official church-sanctioned activities, but being in that mindset of serving our community each and every day. That we as individuals would pour ourselves out freely from the overflow of what God is doing in us every day of the week, not just the day of the week where we gather corporately. We've seen great strides in this church. We've seen deep relationships formed, people growing, people being encouraged, like success stories in people's lives, and that's awesome. People being encouraged and encouraging others and loving others as well. And again, this is great, but we want more. I'm not satisfied in that. Like, good is good, but like we want God's greatness. More is coming. More is happening right now. This isn't some theoretical more later. I mean, I know we're laying the groundwork for more later, and I'm thankful for that, but things are happening now. We want more for now, more for the near future, and we want to be able to set the table for success in this church for generations to come. I had this vision the other day of some of our littlest kids, our little kids that are like 2 years old and younger. When the youngest of the kids in this church, I want them to look back 70, 80, 90 years from now, and when they're old and crusty and we're far, far gone, I want them to be greatly impacted and blessed by what we are doing now. I hope they remember the past when they're in that stage of life. I hope they remember the past and look upon it with great reflection and are blessed by it. But some churches don't ever make it that far. This all has a tie into the word this morning, so I'm not just rambling, trust me. Well, I might be rambling, but it's a purposeful rambling. Some of you are all like, this isn't a stereotypical message. I'm just sharing my heart this morning. I hope that's okay. Like sometimes it's good to have more of a vision cast. Biblical tie-in, yes, but sometimes we need some vision cast, and I feel like that's what's happening this morning. There are some churches that don't make it to that stage where people are looking back upon generation of the church, because some churches close their doors along the way because they get older and they don't grow, which likely means they're not fulfilling their mission as a church to get outside the church and bring people to Jesus. Sometimes churches have unfortunate things happen where there's scandals or bad leadership. And if you've spent time in any more than one church in your life, you've probably seen some of the highs of churches, some of the lows of churches. Not every church looks the same or operates the same way, which is absolutely normal. We're not all called to look alike as a church. We're not called to be like any other church in our neighborhood. There's some great churches in our city. We are called here uniquely to be LifePoint Community Church, and we make zero apologies for that. We're walking in what God is telling us to do, not necessarily what he's telling somebody else to do. But if you've attended other churches in the past, chances are you've had a bad experience in one. How many of you have had a bad experience in church? I'm sure we can all lift our hands to that. And if you haven't had one, you probably know somebody that has. Churches don't always get it right. Unfortunately, you can go to a church seeking healing and restoration and sometimes walk away with more pain and feeling rejected, the opposite of what's supposed to happen when you go to church. I wish I could say those kinds of things didn't happen in church. It's not supposed to, but it does. The church is made up of imperfect people, including the church leadership. Pastors are imperfect people too. And then they're put in a position where everything they do and say is scrutinized, which makes it even worse. So I have to be on my best behavior knowing that people are watching. I'm very much aware of my own imperfections. I'm a flawed leader. I'll be the first person to tell you that. If somebody's pointing at me saying you're flawed, I've already admitted it first, so we'll work on it. But just know that if I ever do or say anything as a pastor or this church hurts you in some way, it's never the intent. And if there's ever an offense, to come to me, tell me so we can work it out. I hate when people leave a church hurt but never address the hurt on the way out. The only way for me to know what I did and begin a process of reconciliation is when you come to me. But again, being hurt in a church is unfortunately common. But finding restoration and reconciliation in that same church you were hurt in is a little more rare. I've been hurt in a church by pastoral leadership in multiple churches. Some of you can understand that. You've probably been hurt in a church before on some level, and so sometimes when we come to church, even when we come to a good church like LifePoint, we come carrying the offense of where we've been before, and we're like bracing. We haven't had anything bad happen to us yet here, but we're just bracing because we know we've been hurt in church before, and chances are we're probably going to be hurt again, so we just come in like closed off because we don't want to get hurt. When we allow that to shape our church experience, we tend to keep our circle of influence small, not opening up to people. We don't engage with the church to our full capability, and we never really feel like we're at home because we've closed ourselves off. When we've had bad experiences in church, we carry those bad memories from previous churches. Not only does it affect us, it actually affects the church that you bring them to. I hope you understand that. If they're not dealt with, it affects the church that we bring them these bad memories and defense mechanisms to. That's a true story. I shared a story a couple of weeks ago how I was offended, one of my deepest wounds from church. But if I had not healed and I had carried that wound from 5 years ago into this moment here right now, this church would not be the same. I probably would have imploded the church. The church just probably wouldn't exist because I would have ran everybody out because of how I would have been leading the church with that hurt. And you can have that same impact on a church as well. If you brought baggage with you when you came to Life Point, which is okay, there's no condemnation in bringing your baggage with you, but let's work on your baggage. Don't let this church be the place where you bring your baggage and you set it down for a while, but then you get mad at me or the church or for some reason, and guess what? On the way out the door, you stop and pick up your baggage and walk out and take it to the next place. If you can't figure out why you're not happy in a church, if you aren't finding joy in a church, it's probably not the church necessarily overall. It's probably more than likely something in your life that needs a touch from Jesus. There's no condemnation there. That's just the fact. Enough with the bad. How many of you have gone to really good churches? Really good churches. How many of you have ever attended a really good church before? Not everybody's hands up, and that's kind of, you know what? Everybody's hand should be up because you're attending Life Point Community Church, which is a really good church. And so either some of y'all didn't understand the question or you're like questioning whether this is a good church or not. And if that's you, let's have some counseling moments, maybe even an altar call like at the end of things. Whew. Just saying. I'm sure many of you can look back to previous seasons of life, previous church experiences, where it seemed like there was this season where everything was pretty much perfect, and if you could make time stand still, you'd want to stay in that church with those people, building great relationships and just doing life with them. Like that was the sweet spot, and you'd never want that season to end. Like I've been there. The first church I ever went to from the ages of 3 to 13 was not a church that I enjoyed going to at all. Matter of fact, I remember at 13 saying, if this is what church is, I don't want to be a part of a church. But that changed in my 8th grade year, November of 1990. My mom and dad, my sister and I, we were checking out new churches. We walked into Calvary Open Bible. It's in Springfield. It's one of our sister churches. We love them. We immediately knew that it was home. It was one of those churches where it was safe. It had healthy leadership. That was my home for most of 20 to 25 years. Sarah was with me there for a while. Convinced her to come to my church when we got married, not the other way around. My church was better. I mean, hers was good. Mine was better. My parents still attend and serve there almost 33 years later. Of course, the church has changed over time. It wasn't about one person, one leader, one thing, because the church changes over time. People come and go. There's been pastoral transition a couple of times. But that was the moment for me. Like if I could have been frozen time in church, I would have been in that mode. It stayed forever. And it probably, for me, the sweet spot, sorry, this is pre-Sarah, the ages of 15 to 19. Teenager, big youth group, lots of cute girls. That wasn't the whole thing. It was a big thing, but not the whole thing. There were more great times when I look back at that season of my life in the church and think of some of the great times, not just in my life, but the church as a whole. I loved it. It was a church of about 400 people, and I think I knew 399 of them. It was like really one big happy family. Some of y'all, we're a church of 60, and you're like, I know like 2 people, and you've been coming for 6 months. So let's have a talk about that. Let's start building some relationship. Let's treat each other like family. Some of my best friends to this day are people I met in church, in that church. Matter of fact, my first night of youth group in 8th grade, I met a handful of people that are still some of my best friends to date and have high places of influence in my life. I know that's not normal, but that's a possibility. Church can have a great impact on you in terms of the relationships that you build that last over time. Of course, the church wasn't perfect. None are. But I look back to that season and a few other seasons in that church with great fondness. I remember the time period as the glory days of that church. And that's the name of my message this morning, is Glory Days. Maybe you can look back to seasons that you've experienced in a church that bring you joy when you remember them. And if not, let's create some here. The scripture we're going to read this morning is Psalm 77, and it has to do with the glory days. My wife used to accuse me of living in the glory days. Maybe a little bit more on that later. But we're going to be in Psalm 77, and we're going to read the entirety of it. It's 20 verses, but don't worry, they're short verses because I don't want to put you all to sleep, not naming names. But this psalm is written by Asaph. He's in David's sphere of influence. Matter of fact, he wrote 12 of the 150 Psalms, so he's like the second biggest contributor, I think, to the Psalms. And like David, he kind of tells it how it is. He's got this wide range of emotion, and so he's not afraid to argue with God and tell God he's mad and to cry and to, all the things that you do when you're emoting. And I think that's great because I love how we can go to God in our rawness and on authenticity and what we're feeling in the moment, and he's faithful to listen to us no matter how much we whine and complain, which is good news for us because some of us are whiners and complainers. This Psalm 77, starting in verse 1. I cried out to God for help. I cried out to God to hear me. When I was in distress, I sought the Lord. At night, I stretched out untiring hands. I would not be comforted. I remembered you, God, and I groaned. I meditated, and my spirit grew faint. You kept my eyes from closing. I was too troubled to speak. I thought about the former days, the years of long ago. I remembered my songs in the night. My heart meditated, and my spirit asked, will the Lord reject forever? Will he never show his favor again? Has his unfailing love vanished forever? Has his promise failed for all time? Has God forgotten to be merciful? Has he in anger withheld his compassion? Then I thought, to this I will appeal. The years when the Most High God stretched out his right hand, I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your miracles of long ago. I will consider all your works and meditate on all your mighty deeds. Your ways, O God, are holy. What God is as great as our God? You are the God who performs miracles. You display your power among the peoples. With your mighty arm, you redeemed your people, the descendants of Jacob and Joseph. The waters saw you, God. The waters saw you and writhed. The very depths were convulsed. The clouds poured down water. The heavens resounded with thunder. Your arrows flashed back and forth. Your thunder was heard in the whirlwind. Your lightning lit up the world. The earth trembled and quaked. Your path led through the sea, your way through the mighty waters. Though your footprints were not seen, you led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. I'll get to unpacking a little bit of this in just a moment. But Asaph was remembering a time in the past where the moment that was better than the moment that he was currently experiencing. And I think it's normal for us to do. When we're hurting, we look back and remember the time we weren't hurt. When we're broke, we remember back to the time where we had a couple of quarters to rub together, and we probably didn't spend it wisely, but we remember when we had money to waste a little bit. When we're going through a difficult time, we can look back at a much more simple time, and we hope that it brings us comfort. Even when life is good, it's still fulfilling to look back at previous seasons of life that were also really good. Of course, my wife used to accuse me of living in the glory days. In some ways, I still do. I listen to 80s and 90s music, not just because I'm trying to relive those days, but the music was just so much better back then. And so, matter of fact, in the spirit of this message, I was listening to some Bruce Springsteen, Glory Days, this week on repeat. It's a great song. You know, in my 20s, I loved to look back at some of the things I did in high school, in my pre-marriage days when I was young and free. Now I'm just young. School itself wasn't my favorite, but I found great joy in my circle of friends. I was heavily involved in music. I played the saxophone, but I really, really loved to sing and vocal performance, and I got to do some pretty cool stuff related to that. I was in an a cappella performance group called The Classics. I'm wearing that shirt this morning. Like, talk about the glory days. This is a shirt that I wore as like a freshman and sophomore in high school that I could never give away. It was always a remnant of days gone by. So I pulled that out this morning. First time that I've worn it in 25 plus years. Oh, man. This group was an audition group of about